users, machine learning engineer, data scientists, AI engineers from all over the world, no matter where they are. They submit models trying to predict that specific topic or that specific problem. And the network takes that aggregate, spits out something better than the sum of its parts, and ranks all of the models continuously based on the uniqueness of the information that they provide, right? So we like to think about it, compared to Kaggle, for example, as a perpetual tournament, not like a one and done thing. So the idea there is that you continuously try, despite the regime, despite how things might change, you're always trying to predict the topic itself, right? So that's Allora in a gist. It's in practice a bit more complicated than that. When you're trying to predict the future, it always is. But we have a pretty extensive network to make sure that happens.
Wow. Well, first of all, welcome and thank you for that summary. That was going to be my next question. When can you? I mean, so one of the things that I noted was 140 partners. That's actually very impressive. 140 plus partners, excuse me. Um, Tell me, can you give me like maybe one or two examples of how, like a typical use case from one of those partners without naming them?
Of course. Well, without naming them, of course, think of Kaggle, right? It has multiple competitions. You can predict everything from energy prices to carbon emissions to financial forecasts or company-specific problems. Uh, One that we're kind of like currently working on is actually interesting. It's about EV charging routes, right? You're trying to predict when your car will run out of battery, which are the nearest charging locations based on, your eventual objective, where you want to go. So that becomes kind of like a very interesting prediction problem, uh, depending on the use case of every user that is currently on the move. So we have a partnership with a very big company, kind of like that, that handles 5G towers all over UK for now, but it's expanding. It's expanding further and further. So one of these cases, for example, is kind of like my unexpected case when I first joined Allora. That seemed like a pretty interesting problem to solve. Moreover, we're kind of like mostly focusing on crypto and assets at the moment, because typically speaking, yes, we are a crypto company, a crypto AI company, but the idea is that once you submit a model on the network itself, you get scored and weighted, right? And that's where your reward system or where your reward allocation comes from, right? So it's simple as that. With crypto, you have 24/7 markets, so you can always be scored pretty easily. So in that case, it makes like a perfect use case to just launch this concept out in the wider market, let's say. But we're looking at pretty interesting thing. We have a pretty extensive research team made of 4+ astrophysicists. So topics or prediction competitions like space weather, weather in general are also prevalent, and we're looking to expand into further and further domains. I personally, for example, I'm looking into expanding on the sports betting vertical, for example. It's something that I do in my free time, and it's something that eventually we would like to give everyone at Allora the chance to build out their own vertical, to predict the problems that they need and build the problems and build the models that predict the problems that they need to predict. So it is going that route. No promises yet, but that is where the philosophy and the general direction is heading towards.
Interesting. So one thing before we get too deep, because I have like 5 questions at least that I just drew from what you said. But one thing I want us to describe maybe in a little bit more detail, because we've already mentioned it several times, Kaggle. Can
Yeah.
you explain to me what is it? Like, what is its primary function? It sounds like maybe it's still kind of evolving too. There's a lot of other applications it can go to. But what is Kaggle?
Oh, Kaggle is just it's just a platform where different stakeholders, companies, or even people, they post up a competition about specifically targeting ML engineers, AI engineers, or data scientists potentially. That's a kind of like main user base, where they're trying to predict specific problems. You could think like everything that you want to predict. For example, you can try to predict financial problems. What will the Bitcoin price do? You can try to predict environmental problems. If this species is going to get endangered in the next 5 years or no. Um, and you can try to predict economic problems, whatever it may be. So the way that Kaggle works, as a data scientist myself, that I usually tend to use it a lot, is it's a pretty big funnel for proving your skills. You have a problem, you have a data set that Kaggle provides, and you have very specific scoring metrics. You build out your machine learning model, and you submit your output basically, and then it gets ranked. The best performers, they get cash prizes, they get different kudos, and it's also useful for your CV down the line, right? So that is Kaggle in its more like basic understanding or form, I would
Yeah.
say.
Fantastic. Thank you. So you mentioned before, and I think you've kind of reiterated now this idea of like scoring. How does
Yeah.
scoring work on a platform like Kaggle? Is that something that you're like recording on chain? Is that some off chain metric? Like, can you
No,
describe that in as best the detail that you can?
No, it's purely off chain. Kaggle is not a crypto or any crypto adjacent company, I would say. It's been there since data science was a thing. I would say you're scored based on it could be multiple ways. If there's an open problem, let's say like a financial forecast, you want to predict where the S&P 500 is going to go in the next 6 months. After the next 6 months, that the S&P 500 ground truth is available, so like the ground truth at that point, you would see who predicted it best. There are kind of other metrics that you can use to predict based on the data scientist or the team behind the competition as well, like how the linear regression would look like, how the overfitting guardrails, for example, would look like, etc. So it depends. Like there are good criterias when you have like the signal to noise ratio, right? So there are ways to judge a priori, like if the model is going to do well or not, for non-technical, just explaining it for a non-technical audience. So you would try to hit that ratio, like what is useful information versus what is just statistical noise. And that's how you would get ranked on it, right? But usually it happens when there is ground truth available, in most competitions, I would say.
And I guess one other question that I wanted to ask, based on kind of one of your previous comments when you were introducing Kaggle, is it sounded almost like an oracle in terms of like determining some truth. Can you maybe differentiate Kaggle from oracles that some of us may be familiar with? Something like Chainlink, for instance.
Um, yeah, so it's comparing, I would say, Chainlink to Kaggle or perhaps to Allora in a very basic way would be comparing like a wholesaler to a fortune teller, for example, or Yahoo Finance or Bloomberg Terminal versus a hedge fund, right? The idea is that you can get like the best source of the ground truth. What's the current market price now? Because that's measurable. That is something that already exists. The price of gold across 10 different exchanges at the moment. But when you're trying to predict in the future, that's a whole different ball game, right? It looks similar, right? Like an Oracle product, but technically trying to predict the future, you run into all kinds of issues. And as kind of like what Kaggle seems to offer, or data scientists do in general, they try to predict the trend, they try to predict where the market is heading. But at the end of the day, it's a market prediction, it's a probability, right? It's not that this thing is going to happen 100% of the time. uh, it may be for sure, but it's not guaranteed. 99% of the cases, it's not guaranteed. So that's the main difference on a philosophical basis, I would say.
Okay, that's valid. Thank you so much for that. So, what is the entry point for a typical consumer or user on Kaggle for them to start using it?
Oh, they just log into their platform. They pick out the competition. They have usually a brief introduction to the problem they're trying to predict, the data sets that are available, because everybody gets the same data sets, right? Everybody's starting from the same plate. Might be something relevant to ontology here as well, from what I've read. And they start building out their different machine learning models. Some might have supervised learning, some might have unsupervised learning, some might look at different types of feature sets, right? The idea at the end of the day is the output, right? You're all trying to predict the same thing with different ways. And the idea is that, do you predict it better than the rest? And then you get a leaderboard. Every user on Kaggle for specific competitions, they get ranked based on their performance. And usually the top three, or top five, top 10 would get prizes for that. And there's a kind of like an achievement system also within Kaggle to see different people how well they're doing, etc. It's a good one for finding jobs. I will tell you that much.
I mean, it's definitely sounds like you've applied some game mechanics into it,
Yes.
which definitely make it a lot more fun and attractive for someone to return, right? So retention probably very important, and it sounds like that's useful for that. I wonder if you because to be honest, I haven't played it yet. I haven't participated in the network yet, and I should. Um, what is the like, are you aggregating people's, kind of overall performance to then have that become a part of, like, maybe some future rewards? As an
Yeah.
example, is it like an aggregate score where if you've performed well over weeks or over campaigns, that you're able to then unlock, like, maybe different tiered challenges and tiered rewards as well?
We're talking about Kaggle or Allora, right? 'Cause-
Let's talk about Allura more generally, yeah.
Yeah. That's a very good question, and that's kind of like the main specific question we try to answer. So think it like this: usually, you have in the network you have three types of models that you would apply with, right? What most is relevant to the community are called workers, which are just plain machine learning models that could be anything. The IP still resides with the user as a permissionless network. They build out, they host it. We also are looking to offer our own hosting in the coming days for this model, and they participate in a given topic. Now, what is the topic? The topic is just, as you can say, like a Kaggle competition, quote unquote, that runs perpetually, right? So I would give you like an example of a topic, a very, very simple one. You predict the volatility of Bitcoin in the next 15 minutes, right? So you will try your model, right? You will try to predict the volatility, what the volatility metric would be in the next 15 minutes for Bitcoin, right? When the 15-minute comes, then we have something called reputers, which collect the ground truth and weigh your predictions against what actually happened after 15 minutes. Were your prediction right? Was your prediction wrong? How off the mark was it? Et cetera, et cetera. Then you have something that we call forecasters, right? And the forecasters we're planning to open to the community relatively soon. The idea with the forecasters is that they're trying to forecast how good the worker will be. Your machine learning model will be in the next 15 minutes. So the idea here is that once you have plenty of models, right? So once you have 100 people that each submitted one model, so now you have 100 users, each with their own model, 100 models on the network, you're trying to get an inference synthesis, right? So you're trying to combine all of these predictions into a prediction that would be, better than the rest of them. You were trying to use this collective intelligence or the swarm intelligence to come up with one final number for Bitcoin volatility in the next 15 minutes. Then, um, at the end, your worker itself, among 100 workers, will be ranked, all right, about how well it predicted Bitcoin in the next 15 minutes. So you get a ranking, every 15 minutes about how good your worker is, and that's where your reward, where you end up in the leaderboard, right? And the way that you get higher ranking is mostly based on the uniqueness of your information given, not necessarily if you're correct or not, because 50 people might be correct. Yes, 50 models might be correct, but they don't add new information into the system. What we're looking here is trying to find more orthogonal information, more models that predict the same thing through different independent lenses. That's how we make the predictions better going forward. So this runs, for example, with the Bitcoin 15 minutes, it runs perpetually, right? Every 15 minutes, you get a score, you get the rewards, you get, um, rewards more if you're kind of like higher in the leaderboard. If you're like lower on the leaderboard, you don't get as much. So it runs perpetually. But the idea is that the market will shift, the regime will shift. Maybe your model is really good at predicting, when Bitcoin is pretty volatile, but when it's kind of like going smoothly, it doesn't do such a good job, right? So you as a user will have to be mindful of this, right? Because this keeps, if you want to earn rewards, you have continuously have to upgrade your model over and over again in order to earn more rewards. That's in a gist how the whole system works.
Wow.
Then,
Yeah, that's very
yeah.
thank you so much. That's a very thorough answer, and it's very clear as well. I was wondering, you're kind of referencing these forecasters and just generally the typical user that's logging in and participating in, in this network. And I wonder, how would you define a typical user? Like, who are they? What are they normally used to doing? Because I mean, I don't think that it necessarily is something that most people would, generally at least be in their radar. Maybe they would understand it once they're in there and they get some practice.
Yeah, I mean that is indeed true. So I would say that our main kind of like audience, I would say, or the core audience, are indeed like data scientists, machine learning engineers, etc. But I think with the advent of AI, more and more people are starting to become interested in solving machine learning problems. So that audience is expanding quite a bit. So it's simple. We run a platform called Allora Forge, which is kind of like supposed to be the on ramp to submitting and creating models on the network. So the idea is that for a user, right, that log in, they have their own profile and stuff. They have the docs, and their data sets are already handled, as I said with Kaggle. So you don't have to do data engineering. They can use the hosting platform, so they don't have to wonder with DevOps stuff as well. They have the Forge Builder Kit, which just gives them all the tools they need to build a model for Allora specifically. They can read the documentation, etc., and they have a list of these topics. So what they would do is take a look at these topics, see their emissions, what they would like to participate in, and they go in and start building their own models and submitting on the network, and then they can track that performance going forward. So it's kind of simple. It's not easy, but it's definitely simple, when it comes to onboarding.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I don't know, I'm one of the few people that think that there should be a barrier to entry if something requires more effort. That's
That
not a
is true.
problem. Yeah.
That is true, but so how we run the barrier to entry, right? You need very good models, right? So in order to get like a good output, if your models are not that great, then the inference synthesis, or the machine intelligence, the swarm intelligence won't be good because it's based on the constituents. So how do we solve that? That is actually pretty straightforward. We run a test net where everyone is a bit of a permissionless system that for every topic type, let's say for predicting Bitcoin volatility in the next 15 minutes, there are certain criteria, in this case 7, that they have to hit with their model for a given period of time continuously in order to get promoted to mainnet when they start earning real rewards, right? So that is the barrier to entry to getting good models. And these criteria are, judged before by a research team to kind of put that, barrier to entry to where you can really start earning money. So the testnet is open to everyone, but to get to the mainnet, you just have to prove to be good. That's your worth the salt, basically, quote unquote.
I am part of a community of really talented AI engineers. And there's this one person in particular that comes to mind. He's developing a stellar, not in the being nice kind of way, but stellar in terms of like, tracking the stars and satellite movements and rocket launches. He's building an incredibly sophisticated model based on that information. I can already see him being very interested in contributing and participating in the in what you're building at Allora. This sounds fantastic.
Thank you, Hamdi. Actually, it is. For example, space is one of those things we're kind of like super excited about internally. I would say that much. Uh, but for the audience, especially, I would just give it like this. For example, I've always been a sports betting quant all my life for almost 10 years now. I would like, something like that to be on Allora. Imagine, if you're an astrophysicist and you're trying to predict, like, for example, space weather, or trying to predict, rocket launches, whatever it is, you have a certain experience within you that you've been doing this for a while. Imagine if there's a network where like-minded people with more or less the same level of technical ability could all work in. So, and this network would provide you something better than what you can do by your own. Right? And you all earn rewards through it. That's the kind of like the big vision at Allora, and that is where I think it's pretty interesting. Finding like-minded people and using the network to come up with something that you couldn't on your own.
That's fantastic. I actually just dropped the link to this conversation in that group chat because I just couldn't wait. So hopefully we'll be getting some of those AI engineers in the audience,
Oh,
and my
thank you.
friend specifically who's building that model, because I just think that this conversation is so just pertinent to the work that's being done there. Um, One thing that I wanted to ask, because I also have conversations with several AI companies, especially those that are building for the agentic space. What is your view to agents participating in this network? Is that something that is in your periphery, or as of now, are you just looking at this being an exclusively human domain?
Um, Actually, I would like to say, that we're also looking at having agentic network, so LLMs could be part of it. But that is still a work in progress. I'll say that much, so it's not something, I'm at liberty to say how's it going, but stay tuned. That's for sure. Um,
Look, if I can't draw out alpha, I'm doing a terrible job here. So you don't have to admit it, but it sounds like it is at least something that your team is looking at right now.
I would say they're looking pretty heavily into it. I'll give you just a little bit of signal there because I like, hunting.
I mean, look, I appreciate you for having shared even that much. I ask, I mean, obviously, because I think that we're just in a time where the proliferation of agents has been huge, and I think even that word is an understatement. There are just so many different agents now coexisting with us on so many networks that we traditionally would consider a human kind of experience, even social spaces, right? Like on X, where it is one, very difficult to maybe identify who they are, but two, some people might say, oh well, it's unfair. I think it's an open marketplace, and I think that agents are proving to be very skillful in certain areas, which can definitely allow for scaling of these solutions much more quickly, and for the benefit of the human participants, monetizing the network much more, rapidly as well. So, yeah, I just, and I also talking to customers, or not customers, companies who are building systems, tools for us to better identify the agents that are, amongst us, one, but also to better facilitate on ramping of those agents into these
Yeah.
platforms, because of course they're not searching the web the way that we traditionally do that. They're searching the web a lot more, I would dare say, efficiently, and so it's definitely important for us to develop the tools, the systems for them to be able to discover and participate more easily as well.
Yeah, I would fully 100% agree on that. Uh, I would say basically that what we do, is not necessarily misaligned with the agentic economy. Actually, they work hand in hand together, right? Because think of it this way, you use your agent to fix your Excel. It will spin up some code, right, to fix up that Excel. Doesn't mean that coding is done now that the agent can do it. The coding is there. It's you still have Python, you still have all the different programming languages up there. The agent just uses it better than a human will. But that scaffolding is what we provide. um, So think of it this way, the agent can consume Allora inferences. It stays on top of them, everything that the network produces, it takes, and it treats that as a better market intelligence, I would say, than what it can find out there scraping the internet or what it can find from other data providers or prediction providers, right? So I would say that they work really hand in hand. And this could be used for a lot of things, for security, for even having, workers could be, transformer architectures or LLMs, right? Imagine if you have a topic that you can find if this X post is written by an agent or a human, instead of just having your Claude or GPT run it. Imagine if you have on the network 150 or 200 different agents from different users, each, with their own specific tweaks that can do that for you, so you would get a better result and a better answer from just running your own agent. That's the idea here.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and thank you for sharing that. I don't want to go too far back, but there was a question I had here that I want to at least touch on because you were talking about crypto volatility and that kind of being a good example of how you can use the platform today. Why specifically that, and how are you looking at that being a springboard for like the next series of I guess modeling that can be done on the platform?
Well, the volatility side is it's actually a very interesting story of how we came up to that conclusion. Actually, the idea with the financial data, I would say, are you can try to predict price, but it's a very noisy thing. But volatility, you can run it for risk analysis, especially you can use it for making your trades better, and it acts more as a supplement rather than an outright prediction. For example, for your own models. So let's say you can run your own volatility estimate of Bitcoin, right? And you have to build certain tooling and structures or even submodels around that if you're trying to predict Bitcoin in a meta model. Imagine if you would just get your Bitcoin predictions, volatility predictions straight from Allora via the API, and your model, for or your trading bot or whatever it might be, will have a better risk analysis that whatever you could pull through, right? Or in the worst case scenario, you have built that tooling already. You separate that, you put that as an Allura inference worker or forecaster, and you would know that you also get your model plus all the other Swarm intelligence to your eventual trading bot, right? But the risk analysis, I think, is something that we're interested into, and we're pretty much looking to expand towards. The thing is that the work so far has been mostly done on infrastructure and tooling. Right now, we're focusing very heavily on building the community and bringing more and more topics online, especially now with the mainnet upgrade where you can predict multi-output topics, right? So you don't predict one certain thing like where volatility is going to be, but imagine if you can predict the entire hyperliquid universe volatility at 15 minutes, at 30 minutes, for example. Now the network upgrade allows us to do that. So the tooling is there. Now we're looking just to expand our range of topics, I would say. And the risk analysis was more a bit of a pilot project because it's just so useful to many people. So it touches that much more of the market.
Yeah, and I can see how this is beneficial to businesses too, right? Because it sounds like it could potentially be a two-sided marketplace. I don't know if that's how it works. But
That's
you
exactly
have
how
the
it works.
consumer end. Yep. Fantastic. Yeah, so you have the consumer end, the B2C model, but you also have the B2B model on the back end. There's a company who's, like you said, doing some risk advisory or risk work in the financial markets. This type of data would be incredibly useful to them to better understand that volatility and better kind of, I guess, ensure assets based on that information.
Yeah, well, when you get down to the very basic concepts of it, it acts as a flywheel, basically. So you have this economic flywheel. The idea is that, for example, at Allura, we could be 50 people just doing risk analysis as a company, right? So we had to find some signal in the market, for example, related to volatility. But what we do, we outsource some of that signal or all of that signal to the community. So we're doing crowdsourcing, all right? But we're doing crowdsourcing with the special gist that the network actually provides you something better than just having people say, hey, give us models and we'll give you some money back. No, like, let's try to build something better than what's out there, having this perpetual competition that you're always engaged in working towards. And the final result of that competition, you can consume it for yourself, or, it goes out there in the world and people can take from it. So, you're both the producer and you can also be the consumer of your work, or kind of like the community's work.
Actually, that brings up an interesting question for me, and that is, so this idea of contributing and open sourcing, the not open sourcing, excuse me, that's probably the wrong word, but putting it out there to the network to contribute openly these different models. Are you seeing collaboration between people who are contributing some of their models already? Meaning, there's a model that's more likely to outperform. Do you then see some of those other data scientists coming in and then co-contributing to that model that's now more performative?
Actually, that's a very interesting question. We do run a Discord, that we're pretty active in. And I've seen that actually there are multiple teams submitting models, so there are like groups of 3, 4 data scientists, each building, everyone building models together and contributing to this. So they run a team. It's also something that happens on Kaggle as well. It's natural that people would want to work together to submit something, and then make their work better. As far as the current capability that exists on Allora, it doesn't exist yet, but we're adding it too. We're always looking to expand the platform, and actually we're rolling changes every week. Since we launched the Forge platform, which again is our on ramp towards testnet, and then you compete to eventually join mainnet and win rewards, I would say.
Yeah, the reason why I ask, I mean, this is going back to kind of the this scoring system, the monetization, but also the agentic side. I'm thinking about how, and as a PM, I think you probably have already considered this, and the framing might be similar. Is that you have a model that is performative, you have people who are interested in contributing to it. There is maybe a some sort of like validation system to make sure the people that are requesting to contribute on the platform directly can be measured based on the value that they've created, right, in the network. And then the person who owns that model would then say, yeah, indeed, let's definitely scale, work on this faster. But once, if because it hasn't been confirmed, agents are allowed into the network, you can also do the same thing. And I can already see how this can exponentially grow, and the human AI collaboration would just, I think the implication is massive for how these models can grow with kind of maybe a human being more directionally involved.
That is indeed the case. Like, I've seen exactly what you said, pretty apparent lately. I've also seen it at Numerai, for example, that you got many more submissions. For the Forge, we launched on July 2nd, and the community and the models beat our expectations by 1,800%. Actually, it was a pretty big surprise from the community. I'm very thankful to everyone involved, and I think a key part of that is how much AI has accelerated things, not only on the quantitative side but also on the qualitative side. Everybody is using, well, let's say, the different LLMs like Claude, Kimi, Sol 5.6 now, to build their own infrastructure. Actually, we do have, or we used to have, that is still there. It's being reworked on. Another partner, which was called Robonet, and what Robonet would just give you is the entire tooling and workbench to create better strategies via your AI, right? So we provide that tooling for it, so the users could build strategies themselves while also being able, if they want, to consume Allora inferences, for example. So that has seemed to be kind of like the case moving forward. And I would say that with the human in the loop that we're seeing right now, is just 10xing everything all over the board, right? So the better the intelligence layer becomes, the better the inferences become, and if those inferences could be further down the line being consumed by agents, right, by different LLMs that you may run on top of it, right, on the consumption side, the possibilities are endless for different kinds of problems, right, not only financial.
Yeah, and I keep going back just to things that we talked about in the beginning, and we are talking about how no matter how much AI is involved, humans are still very important for a lot of the directional work, right? And I just personally think that that is going to be where we fit in this very rapidly evolving space where we coexist with agents. Is one thing that agents don't do very well. You could program, I guess, kind of an operator role to kind of sit between these agents and provide some direction and correction sometimes. But I think humans are much better at that still. And so I think that this is a really wonderful kind of concept. And potentially, if that's how Laura chooses to implement that, I think it'll open up a lot of not just interest, but participation as well.
Basically, yes. LLMs in general, I would say, are still, fundamentally, or very on a very fundamental principle based on the latent space, which is just kind of like the vast human knowledge that's being consumed by them during their training data. So they only, the transformer architecture has, pattern recognition, etc., but they're still, always going to be dependent on the latent space and the training data that they've been trained upon, right? And the thing about that is that you have this philosophical or fundamental barrier that they can only look backwards to predict the future, right? But they cannot really do anything beyond that. Their knowledge is cut off until this very moment. When you're trying to predict the future, then the whole surface changes, right? So at Allora, we're trying to make this super intelligence based on all these different community models, based on LLMs, whatever architecture that you might choose, and the community might choose to contribute with, that it's not basically always going to be a slave, quote unquote, of the latent space and the knowledge information up until now. And that is where humans come in, right? Because humans are not, you're not basically a slave or a dependent on this kind of like quote unquote latent space that LLMs have. You can think forward. You can think about how to think about the future. You have your own interpretations of it. You have willpower, right? You have your own personal will and your own personal outlook on things that the model just lacks. The model is just a snapshot. When the session ends, you may have a memory, right? But that memory is something that you also might have written or that has might written from a previous session. So it's always going to be this collection of snapshots, just as a video, right, is a collection of still images. Like, right now we have like 400 hertz videos, so I have 400 pictures in a second, right? But it's just a collection of pictures. Reality is not a collection of pictures, right? That is where the key human difference is. How you perceive it is much different from how LLM perceives it. And it's always going to be like this. That's why the human, like personally, I'm never going to be worried that the AI will take our job or anything like that, because humans are just that special that we haven't managed to replicate yet on a fundamental basis.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I know that one of the things as a human, I suck at is multitasking. I really love to take on a lot of different things on my plate. Usually, my to do for a day professionally, this is not even like on a personal level, has like 6 or 7 things I need to get done. Do I need to get them all done the same day? Probably not. I could be probably better at prioritizing. But I can say with full confidence that since augmenting myself, using different AI tools, I have been able to take on and multitask because the efficiency goes up, right? You have this ability to co-work, um, and then if possible, you have this ability to even offload some of this work through agents that might have a very specific purpose. So 100%, I agree with your view of that. and allows for us as humans to have better context inputs, right? And allow for more of a visionary role in terms of like how everything would eventually come together.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, that's what we're also trying to do at Allora, right? You want to multitask, for your model, you want to try to predict volatility, you try to predict volume, you try to predict, for example, funding rates. Imagine if, you can just consume this directly from our topics and you only have to do the visionary stuff with potentially like a trading bot on top of it. But the fundamental principle transferred to different domains. It just doesn't have to be finance. But that's the kind of like the main goal that we're trying to get here, trying to give, people something that is very forward looking, and it's again not always going to be based on the training data of just like one specific LLM, right? Because at the end of the day, you also want to be, the you want to give the judgment calls, right? You don't want to outsource that to AI, because I've seen, you mentioned, Humpty, that indeed, your efficiency 10x's. But when you do that, your potential for things to go wrong also 10x's. So you can go exponentially wrong. How do we do it that you never, you're maybe not never going wrong, but you also always will try to positively exponentially 10x yourself? That's the question, right? So it depends on very specific things, very specific objectives. And these objectives are, when circling back to Allora, this is what the topics are at the end of the day, right?
Well, it looks like we're almost at the top of the hour, so I'm just going to ask you one more question here, and feel free to take as much time as you want answering it. But based on the work, excuse me, that Alora is currently doing, what do you think the AI economy will look like in the next like year or two if what you're doing keeps kind of proving itself to be the right move, the right bet?
Looking at it from a product perspective, and I haven't been that long in the company, but looking at it from a product perspective also as an engineer, what I would say is, let's take a look, for example, very quickly at the gold economy, right? Previously, 200 years ago, you would have people sifting through the lake, through the rivers with a sieve, right, trying to catch whatever gold would pass through, the gold rushes. The amount of gold that used to be produced back in the day, right, was very minimal to what we produce now. But now, all surface gold is strip mined. You don't have any gold found on the earth top anywhere. So what's happening now? Now you dig very deep, you gather a lot of soil and dirt from 2, 3 kilometers down, and then you treat that through various industrial chemical processes. And the amount of gold that you extract right now is much, much higher, right? But now you have this gigantic economy that goes with it, right? Not a single person can drill down 2 kilometers and have all the necessary chemical infrastructure to extract that much gold. So the idea that you see right now is kind of like the same. Everything is being supercharged, but you need this entire AI infrastructure, that is kind of like Anthropic, OpenAI, et cetera, to get a hold of this quote unquote gold, which is just intelligence at the end of the day. So everything, is being more or less constrained by 2 or 3 big companies, maybe potentially even more, right? You can try to solve that via open source, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we do at Allora? What's the main idea here? The main idea here is that what is the intelligence that you can consume down the line, right? That you consume from these big companies. What if that intelligence, you have a part to play in it? Because let's be frank, even with Entropic, you have a part to play in it. Somewhere, sometime, it scraped your whatever you produced out there, right? And it's part of this training data. But what if it's democratized, right? So you have this super intelligence that is made up of all these different problems down the line, that you democratize both your input and your output. So you both benefit and contribute to it continuously, because it runs perpetually. That's the main idea, I would say, going in the future with AI. So we might see, the market incentives are there for, AGI and super intelligence to come, sure. But also this, more open source democratization angle I think that also Ontology, tries to solve as well from what I've seen. Because if you own your data, right, you have a piece of that pie, right? And nobody can take that from you. It's in the chain. We try to solve the same thing, but with the output, not with the input, right? So that's the kind of like the general idea where that is heading. On the broader market context, I just think, it's just going to be a bigger case of Javan's paradox. There's going to be more gold mined, definitely, right? It's just going to be a bit more industrial. Uh, but what I kind of like, I would, the caveat, right, that I would personally add is that now with AI, you can build that entire infrastructure, right? You can build the entire mine that is 2-3 kilometers deep. You can build your entire, chemical plant to extract that gold and that intelligence. So it's not always going to be in the hands of a few anymore, So the market incentives are going that in that direction. So that's kind of like my 2 cents on it, I would say.
Fantastic. No, I agree with a lot of what you've said there. Well, I mean, as we're closing up here, anything that we didn't discuss that you think that we should mention? If not, let us know where to find you.
Um, yeah, so I think we covered everything. I don't know if you have any questions yet remaining, but yeah, you can find me on X. My handle is Golden Janus. So I'm a PM at Allora. You can find it in my bio as well. I've been around in the crypto AI space for almost 6-7 years, but that's the first podcast actually that I do. So you can always connect with me there. And don't forget to check out the Allora network and the Allora Forge as well. If what I said up until now is of interest, I would say.
Well, thank you, Ansel. Honestly, I'm known to always find people who have never been on a podcast and put them on the podcast first. So I'm very happy to have found you, to have been able to talk to you today and learn a lot about not just your work at Allora, but just generally the impact that Allora is trying to make in the AI economy. So thank you so much for joining us today. For any one who's listening who's not already following Ontology, we're at Ontology Network on X. You can get more information about what we're building at ont.io.